Hi, welcome folks. Sometime in life you have to laugh at yourself. This video I'm making here is always for me and for my own personal use, for my information. I'm making these videos because when I come back, I want to be able to listen to myself, giving myself instructions about what I have found and what I believe to be is the reality of life. It is very difficult to know that you have live your life for almost 45 years, 50 years, and you have entrenched yourself in the belief system so much that you cannot understand the realities that is painted by the wall. However, you would walk around in life and you would say to yourself, hey, this car or this bus or this house is built from sand. This house is built from sand. Oh, we needed wood, we needed gravels, and we needed cement, or we needed lumber. And then you walk outside and your child say, oh, daddy, can we build this house from cardboard? And you look at the child and say, no, you don't use cardboard to build houses, except it's a model house, right? And you bring sense to the child by saying, listen, you need sand, cement, gravel. Sometimes you have to mix it in different ratios and different proportion based on what you're building. If you're trying to make bricks or blocks, you need to mix it in certain proportions to get that out. And then you put concrete and you get mortar to smooth the walls. You get paint to make the walls look beautiful. And you understand that process as a human being in 2024. However, it seems to be very difficult to understand the process of our human nature and the development of what we call the temple or the castle or the body. We are not built from glucose, we are built from the substance that build things, amino acids, and of course, fatty acids. Just like how you want to smooth up the wall, you need the fatty acids to smooth up the cells, and you need the vitamins and minerals to patch the little places and make sure that everything is nice and dandy, and the electrical connectivity and the internet wires are well run within the body. That's why we need all these things. Do you hear me say that we need anything they call glucose? No, but glucose is fundamental. In fact, the designer of the human body knows that the body runs on energy, so he did not leave energy production up to you putting it in your mouth. Energy production is actually determined by the body, and when the body is, especially the brain, when it is running into a crisis for energy, it runs to the liver and say, hey, you gotta put some glucose in the blood so I could get my glucose. And in fact, I don't even know if the liver is putting just glucose and some kind of substrate around glucose to protect it, because it's going to the brain, and not everything that cross over from the blood into the brain layer. The brain is such a sensitive area. Nevertheless, today I want to speak a little bit about our understanding of the true nature of carbohydrates, specifically carbohydrates. There is nothing they call carbohydrates. That's the first thing we need to understand. There's a label protein, there's a label carbohydrates, there's a label minerals, there's a label vitamins, there's a label fatty acid. What we need to know is change our mindset, or what is instructive for you to know is that I should change my mindset and say, what are the sources of amino acids? Then I speak about things like meat, fish, egg, protein, legumes, whatever. Then I should ask, what are the sources of glucose, fructose, and galactose? Then I should say, oh, that's coming from our milk if it is not fermented. And then it's coming from what? Everything else around you that is made from these green things that we call plants, the excellent plants. And then what is fatty acids? What are the sources of fatty acids? You could go around and identify your oils, your butter, whether it's plant-based oils, which are not the best, and butter and ghee and everything. The fats from animals, the fats from eggs, cheese, and all other sources, even walnuts and whatever. I'm just naming sources. I'm not classifying them as yea or nay, fatty fish. Then you say to yourself, okay, so it's sources of fatty acids we need, sources of minerals we need to know the sources of these things. So for those of us who are not in the supplementation or could get access to certain good foods, when we find the foods that provide the amino acids and the fatty acids, we then ask ourselves, how could we best manipulate the plant to give us that substrate? Now, this is an instructive video for myself here, because what I'm learning and what I've learned, and I'm going to continue to repeat it to myself until it becomes not true, because it is so real that the truth about it is just a slap in the face that you need to deny it until you cannot deny it no more. That which we call carbohydrates Irregardless of how many grams of so-called labeled words protein that is found in it, because it does not have protein, it's a source of, it may be a source based on which legumes and those things, a source of amino acids, is not as easy as you think. From a logistic point of view or logical point of view, you have to understand the logistics in the digestive process when it comes to carbohydrates. First of all, you ask yourself, what is carbohydrates and where is carbohydrates targeting when it is placed in the mouth? The glucose in carbohydrates, let's look at the one monosaccharide that is consumed most abundantly because of any plant product and any refined product from your supermarket. What is found there is a whole amount of glucose. Whether it's bounded in fiber, that's a different story, or it's not bounded in fiber, so it's gonna rush across into the blood, that's another story. We are just speaking about what is found as the digestible and crossing the gut into the blood molecule, glucose. That's one of the main. If it is fruit, you have fructose, and if it is high fructose corn syrup, you have loads of fructose, and if it is milk, it would have some lactose, which eventually might turn to glucose somewhere down the metabolic chain. I don't know. The fact of the matter is that we have been just speaking about, oh, good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates. There's nothing good and bad. There's just labels placed on everything, and what we are seeing here is glucose. Because the idea is, you go and you tell somebody that you need to cut down on your sugar consumption, and that's another label that we have been telling people who has been addicted to bread and rice and eating those things in the evening when they are not active or in the office time. That's their lunch is a roti, flour, or some sandwich, flour, loaded with some great plant-based products inside it, more glucose sources. And this glucose is what is going into our body, and when it is abundantly accessible and it is not being consumed, that's when you are inactive. It hangs around like the lazy guys on the block, and what they do, they say idle hands is the devil's workshop, and apparently that is the reality that might be happening inside us. Glucose hands are idle, cannot be consumed because nobody wants it, and so it goes about doing its daily duty of damaging cells, vessels, everything all over, until it gets hauled in or pulled in somewhere between the liver and I don't know who deals with it. Some hormone might be pulling it back out of the bloodstream to cause it to be going to the liver for metabolization into some stored fat, glucagon or glycogen around the liver and those things like that. That's not my business. My business is to understand, essentially, the human body is a physical machinery that is running on recreating itself every moment, because we are physically doing things which is enjoyable or not so enjoyable, and therefore that gives us the ability to tell the body when it is enjoyable to strengthen that organ, that cell, or that whole physicality, because I want to do that activity again, but when I'm doing it again I should be better. That's the stimulation theory. Does not matter what activity we are speaking, we are dancing, we are playing, we are name something, you are meditating, you are just standing up there, and the body is sensing whether you want to do this again. And if you want to do it again, it has to be recreated, it has to be strengthened, or it has to be upgraded for the second option. And that is where we have to sit and ask ourselves, what is the biological process or the whatever magic process that's happening when we stop the activity? What is happening inside the body? Well, in my case, I believe you just have to look at bodybuilders, people who are exercising, and you see when you stop doing a stimulation, you have to supply amino acids and fatty acids, of course with vitamins and minerals, to get the body to enhance what's there, especially if the body was enjoying the activity, or to create new cells by pulling existing stem cells into a specialized part to create a new structure. And all that is needed at this point in time is your amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins and minerals. And you do that in a state of rest. Rest does not mean sleep all the time. It means in a state where whatever you were doing that was causing a stimulation, and do not take stimulation as being some big physical activity. Anything you are doing, whether you're standing outside in the sun, you went to work, you went to school, all these are stimulations. Whenever you stop a stimulation, the body would reach to a state where it says, let me enhance, let me upgrade, because that was an enjoyable or something that I have to do, so I will make the person stronger and better for tomorrow, for the next experience, or for renewing the next experience. That's what the body is trying to do. But we load ourselves up in the evening with carbohydrates from the great breads. And what is happening? We do not compensate even enough amino acids, sources of amino acids, and sources of fatty acids. We continue to eat carbohydrates, and we don't want to understand that the carbohydrates is so well designed. It does not want to stay in an acidic stomach, and it does not want to trigger acidity in the stomach. Yet for all, we sit and behave like if the body was not designed by one who knew what he was doing, or her, what they were doing. As far as I'm concerned, it is quite evident. You do not need scientific literature at this point in time, because there was one sacrifice. A gentleman was sacrificed when he lost his stomach. I can't remember his name. The story is somewhere. I'll find it if you want me to give you that story, or maybe I'll put it in the show notes. To see what happens when we eat certain foods. And when you eat carbohydrates, it is established that carbohydrates do not want to stay in your stomach. And that is understood because carbohydrates do not want gastric acidity for its digestion. It wants to move down to the small intestine so that the amylase could come out of the pancreas and wet it and start the digestive process in a very high efficient way, so that you could get glucose to pump into your blood. That is what carbohydrates is trying to do. So when we consume carbohydrates without trying to get a clear indication of what we are doing to ourselves, when we conclude that we are actually trying to get glucose from all these foods, we would look on our plate and start seeing rice, sources of carbohydrates or sources of glucose, provision, sources of glucose. So you have rice on one side, provision, sources of glucose. You put some salad, sources of nothing, or maybe sources of a little bit of chlorophyll, whatever that is for, good. And then you have a little piece of meat, sources of amino acids and fatty acids. And then you start by eating first your sources of carbohydrates. Your body starts saying, this guy is eating carbohydrates, we do not need to make gastric acid, and so the carbohydrates move quickly out of the stomach. No gastric acid is produced. You do not have any fatty acids in that rice, so you don't have a trigger of what we call the bile to send down to tamper down the acid from the stomach, and so the digestive process is largely on the enzymatic side from the pancreatic enzymes. Little bile. When you eat your meat first, you then say to the body, hey, this is sources of amino acids. I need a strong dose of acid in your stomach to break down this, denature this, uncoil this. I need a strong dose because it has some fatty acids. The fatty acids would persist in holding acid for a longer time in the stomach. When the stomach becomes very acidic in its right design default state, its state of bliss is an acidic state, pH 1 to 2.5. The stomach closes from the inside out with the two valves, the lower LES, that's the first valve, and the lower pyloric sphincter, that's the valve down there, that would empty out. They get closed shut until digestion brings itself to a state of equilibrium, meaning that no gastric acid would be created because the food has enough gastric acid, it has enough concentration, it has enough volume, and the gastric acid is doing its job, the signaling is doing its job, the hormones at play are doing the job. They have figured out through sensory whatever that we need some CCK, we need some GLP, we need some GIP, we need some ALP to talk to different organs down the road when we release our first bolus of chyme through the duodenum. they are already prepared. So once the pyloric splinter open and the first chyme comes out to the duodenum, well, CCK squeezes the gallbladder and we have nice bile coming down to digest, because it says there is a little fatty acid, there are sources of fatty acids there we need to get at. The pancreas releases the enzymes and so forth and so on. I don't know any of what I'm speaking about, but I'm saying it as if I know, because the one thing we are certain about is that carbohydrates is the source of glucose. It doesn't matter if it is the one from the shop or the one from your garden. Plants are sources of glucose. You go back in your primary school agriculture textbooks and you read what plants are doing. They are using sunlight, chlorophyll, and so forth being absorbed, and they are making 2 ATP, using that 2 ATP to make 20 or whatever ATP in the night to bond together water and carbon dioxide to make glucose, the main product of plants. So when we become conscious about that, it's not that we are running away from sources of glucose. We become aware now of strategies. We start determining strategies based on the road on which we are traveling, whether you are in a situation of health crisis or whether you're in a situation of wellness. Based on the road you are traveling, you say, when I'm consuming, I am looking for my sources of fatty acids and amino acids, because my body is in good shape and I'm always active, I'm always up and running, I'm always doing this, doing that. So I need to consume my amino acids and fatty acids when I am in a state of rest, so that the body could take what it wants from amino acids, and what it doesn't want, it converts it directly back into glucose by letting out the sulfur and the nitrogen bond and taking the rest into glucose. So all this is well organized and designed by a designer, but we sit and play around. We take in enough fatty acids because we know we have to ensure that all the cells are well padded with nice fatty acids, so that they could at least still uptake that same glucose molecule to burn or to consume and convert into ATP. And we sit and we then say we have diseases, and this that is like a metabolic crisis with glucose not entering cells, and then we are asking, why aren't they entering the cells? We haven't been asking, why haven't the insulin not being created on the other side by the pancreas there with the beta cells, but we are saying, why is it that the glucose is not being well uptake by those cells? But we forget that fatty acid is what has to create the membrane of the cell. But how do we get to this as lay persons in 2024 to understand your sources of amino acids, whether it is in supplementation form, and you could click the link for Body Health. I do use the supplements once in a while now. I relied on the supplements for my healing very much. Thank you, Body Health. Then I found beef. The challenge with beef, meat, egg, liver for someone who is eating a lot of carbohydrates is simple. The designer would have made your stomach acidity high to uncoil the meat, the protein in the meat, to make it a polypeptide, a long chain, so that it could be dissected by the various pepsin and stuff in the body and pulls out the B12 with intrinsic factor doing its job. That is how the designer designed it, and the fatty acids have to be around to keep the acidity running. But our consumption of that which is anti-gastric acid production, glucose, would cause us to go into a state where we do not produce gastric acid, because it's a conflicting idea to have glucose, sources of glucose, which is what we call carb, in a state first in your mouth and expect everything else to work and operate properly. So if you are wise and you have not listened to anything that I say, you may determine that you may want to put a little bit more meat on your plate and eat that first. Make sure you get fatty acids and figure out what is these sources of fatty acids. Don't be fooled by saying there are only 2 or 3. There are more than 2 or 3. In fact, there are more than 10. They might tell you that some are essential, some are not essential. We don't know. But if we have the sources, we consume. But when you consume those from plants, you have to remember those from plants are not willing to stay in the stomach, and therefore they would rush out. And when they rush out, what happens? Do you think that they're rushing out to go and get the great bile to flow down, or did they get well extracted and denatured before they leave the chyme? That is why we have heard umpteen times that the plant-based protein is of a low digestible and absorbability rate. There is a special score, the score for plant, and you may find plants that may have a profile, amino acids profile that is close to the 9, 8 or 9, with some weaknesses in between. But yet for all, the absorption of these 8 and 9 is a critical factor, largely because your stomach acidity is low. And somebody who would have been practicing a proper conscientious lifestyle of eating would note that they would have been eating with a lot of hydrochloric acid taken in from capsule, like betaine HCl, apple cider vinegar, limes, to help increase acidity when they would be having these types of food. So you're having some quinoa as your main base protein source. That's what you have. You're having some tofu. It's a plant-based product. You then might say to yourself, these all, no matter how they look, they are from plants. They do have a lot of source of glucose. They will try to pull away from the stomach. How do I get that to happen or not happen? And you say, well, putting acids, adding my own acids might help. Now we see that clearly in the structure of the cows, the ruminants, the goats, the sheep, and the deer, and those animals who are ruminants. They were meant and designed to consume plants, plant-based product, in a separate organism structure called, I can't remember the name, but it's the big chamber that we say is the first stomach of the cow. And they keep it there for about 36 hours doing the up and down movement they call rumination, and they are literally fermenting this stuff to extract the glucose, but also to put it in, to extract it so well that when they send it down into the acidic stomach, the protein and stuff like that they have chewed and grind could actually be extracted. The amino acids could come out from the process between the first stomach and the last stomach. The last stomach is like ours in an acidic state, but there are other processes that are happening between. So we look at beef and cows and those things, and we start understanding they don't provide glucose, they provide amino acids, but amino acids in our body could also become glucose if that is required, because we might need some glucose and we run out of some substrate. No problem there. But what we have found is that the animals are teaching us a lesson. The ruminants are teaching us a lesson. If you want to eat plants, eat like a cow. Ferment your products at least 2-3 days in a fermentation type system, and the animal fermentation like system is an alkaline fermentation like system that is an open system, not closed, so it wouldn't make alcohol. It's open, so the carbon dioxide could come out. So we speak about open fermentation like the kombucha, whatever else that they ferment in the world of fermentation. Everybody knows about these things. So these may be better. That's why soybeans may be crap, but tofu may be a little bit more enhanced because of the fermentation, tempeh tofu, the fermentation processes. So if we sit and we eat and we say we are eating fresh and whole and those things of plant-based products, then we might just be putting ourselves down the road of nonsensical behaviors and unrealistic thinking. But if we ferment them because that is what we have before us and that's what we could afford at this point in time, then you go ahead and you learn the process in preparing these plants to make them at least a little bit more bioavailable in terms of their nutritional profile. We cook our lentils and we boast that lentils have so much amino acids, save and apart from one, which methionine, which the rice has. So when you cook the lentils and the rice together, you get it. But you don't sit and say to yourself, but still this is carbohydrates, which you pull out all this stuff from the stomach, so it would not get enough time to do a proper acidic digestion. Even though it has some good amino acids in it, it would not have enough time to extract the amino acids. So how do we fix that? The older folks used to use oils in their soups, coconut oils and whatever other oils. Coconut milk itself is placed in pigeon peas and lentil peas soup and stuff like that, because the oils or the fats in the oils have a natural way of turning up and keeping acid turned on. Now, when we speak about to people and we say to them, okay, you have to, okay, get your lent and you make lent. No, 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 folks. It's all good for you. Or it may just be that you are just consuming lentil and you will be getting the one thing that's abundantly available: high load of glucose. Whether it comes very fast through the blood or it comes very slow because of the so-called fiber that holds it back, that is not the point. If it is 5 million molecules of glucose, it may. If it is in a coke, it rushes to the blood, which is dangerous. If it is in soup and it has fiber, the fiber in the soup, whatever from the beans, the 5 million glucose might take 2 hours. Fine, it still goes across better, but still is glucose. So in this article, what you are looking at here is one that you want to spend some time and ask yourself, interrogate it. Why is acidity in the stomach so important, and what foods causes your stomach to be acidic? What foods causes your stomach to lose its acidity, and what are the risk factors involved here? I hope you have a pleasant one. And when you are returning, or when you have returned, remember me. Thank you.